Good morning, everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for Tuesday, January 10th is convening via video conference pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 as extended on July 16th, 2022. This meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating remotely via Zoom as noted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. Items with public comment: after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, the Sustainability Program Manager, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce is not joining us today. Peter Brace.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Rachel Freeman. Rachel, you need to unmute. Okay, we've got a wave. We heard you earlier.
Here. Thank you.
Ian Golding.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
I do not see Christy Kickham on the screen. I do not see Joanna Roach and Joe Topham.
Here.
Okay, and staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And Morgan Sale.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. And anticipated speakers on the agenda, we have Niles Parker, Executive Director of the Nantucket Historical Association. Good morning, Niles.
Good morning.
Okay, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So turning to the agenda, and Vince, if you want to go ahead and put that on the screen. We have a number of updates and announcements. It's been a while since we got to do all of this, so bear with me. The joint letter to the Mass DEP from the Select Board and the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee was signed and sent on December 6th of 2022. That letter will be attached to the minutes where we adopted it. Those minutes are coming later. The Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, the MCFRM layers for the projected probability of coastal flooding for the present period in 2020, 2030, 2050, and 2070 are now on the town's GIS system. And we'll pause here for a second. Vince, if you want to throw that up on the screen and just show people how to use that.
Absolutely.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead with the other half of the announcement, and that is that the Massachusetts CZM office will be conducting training this year on that model. There is a link in the agenda for more information about that. And they are also holding a survey for more information about what people would like to learn how to do. So for anybody who's interested in this, that is an opportunity, and you can follow those links on the agenda. Vince, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and assume that everybody knows how to get into the town GIS. I can show people how to do that if necessary, but once you're in the map, all you do is click on themes to make that appear, and then you just scroll down the list. There's a whole list here called emergency preparedness. There used to be only 3 maps in this, and we have upped that to 7. So here we have the MCFRM as present, 2030, 2050, and 2070. I'm just going to give a quick show of how this works. Move that out of the way. Click on present for the sake of argument. You can see it brings in that layer. You can make it more transparent so that you can see through it and see the streets underneath. And then you can add other layers, such as utilities for the sake of argument. And then the roads light up there, outside the water mains light up, so does sewer, etc. And you can then see the risk to that particular type of infrastructure under the different scenarios. Then you can go ahead and move from the present, which is 2020, through 2030, 2050, and fix the transparency so you can see stuff. and all the way out to 2070. And this is publicly available. Anyone can go on the town website and find this on the GIS. And just in case people are curious, all you do essentially to get there. Did practice too much, didn't I? All right.
I got this far, Vince, and then I was looking at my house at 3 Willard Street, and I couldn't see what happens in 2030. So how do you do that?
One moment. Nantucket GIS is all I Googled. And then once you get onto the website, just click on Online GIS. You're into the maps. You might have to click and agree. I don't have to click the agreement on because staff. Themes. And let's go right down to preparedness. Gary, do you want me to use your house as an address as an example? Perfect.
Number 3 Willard Street.
I know where you live. All right. This is 2030, right? And
yep. That's what
with Gary's agreement, I'm just going to there is Willard. That's number 3.
Right.
I've
there.
highlighted that property now.
Yep.
Hopefully, people can see that in the center of the screen. And now this is present. Move stuff around.
Well, that's interesting. Is it zoomed in too much for the work?
There it is. Yeah, I got a bit glitchy for a second, didn't it?
So there either may be a delay or it may not work at a certain level of resolution. That's something we should investigate, Vince.
I will. And then that's 20, that's present, and turn that off. Then let's go for 2030 for your address, Gary.
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say for your house, Gary, the water just keeps getting deeper.
Wow.
And then let's go to 2050. So the probabilities here show that you're constantly in the, you move from the 50 percentile to the 100 percentile, and then you kind of stay in the 100 percentile.
Now, we know we get floods in the neighborhood a few times a year, but is it 3 feet or 5 feet or 7 feet? We're up over 8 feet.
Yeah, this doesn't show depth. It shows probability of flooding.
Mm-hmm.
But from the same type of data from NOAA, that'll give you an idea of depth. But using your house is a very good example, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of reflects a lot of the Brand Point neighborhood. And what this shows in kind of nice detail, if you don't mind me showing it this way, say for 2020,
yep,
this is kind of the upper limit of the 100% flood zone. This part of Easton, just across from that new land bank lot right there. And then watch that move inland further in towards the hotel for 2030, and then for 2050. Once you get up to that coastal bank, you end up seeing the probabilities in this area going from the kind of higher probabilities 25, 30, 50 into in this area, in the brighter lower chance probabilities go darker, for want of a better explanation.
Yep.
That's what you see, and that's the purpose of this map.
So don't make reservations at the White Elephant Hotel, huh?
Not for 2050 or 2070 if you plan on being there in a storm.
Yeah, so Vince, let's provide a little bit more clarity. This is not 100% of the time you will be flooded. That's not what we're trying to say here.
Yeah, MCFRM is high tide during a storm.
Okay.
With wave action.
Ian, you have a comment?
I do, through you, Mary, to Gary. Have you approached the HDC for roof-mounted davits for a dinghy for these sort of moments?
Well, all of the houses that are built, including one across the street for my family, we built last year, had to be 8 feet above, sea level, expected, whatever whatever that was. So all the houses are up 8 feet that are being done today, even though ours was done a while ago.
Right. I was just saying it might be useful to have a dinghy that you can launch when you need it,
We have a generator, but no dinghy. But the generator is also 8 feet above the ground.
See, otherwise we might have to put the generator in the dinghy. All right, Peter also has a comment.
Yeah, Vince, so this is when a storm is making the water come in, correct?
Yeah, that's how MCFRM works.
So is there a way, is there a layer that'll show just calm day, sunny day, sea level rise, what people are dealing with?
Well, this is the advantage of using the MCFRM, that it has this information built into it. And if you wanted to use something that just has regular high tide on a normal day, that's when we go back to using NOAA.
Okay, so do you?
It's not something I can extract out from these maps, no.
No, so, but is there a link from here to there, or is there what I'm saying is that people are going to look at this thing and go, oh, gee, during a storm, this is what's probably going to happen to me. But what's happening right now? Is there a place on the town's website that on this somewhere that says, but if you want to see, you know, regular day, click on this link.
Mm-hmm. So
because, you know, not everybody's going to look at it and go, I mean, just, I don't want to make a comment on the intelligence of everybody in the island or everybody in Massachusetts or in the world, but some people are just going to go a quick glance and go, oh my God, in 2030, this is what it's going to look like. So I know it says emergency preparedness, present probability of coastal flooding, but maybe there should be a little dialogue box, something there that says, you know, how to get to NOAA.
Yeah. So where this came from and why this is up here on the town website now is so that it can be part of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's update to the sea level rise recommendation that became a town policy about 2 years ago. So within that update, that's the place to say that normal high tide on a normal day, use NOAA. For storm impacts, high tide and storm impacts plus sea level rise, use MCFRM.
Okay.
Yeah, and Peter, I think I see what you're getting at. I would say that in general, the GIS system needs a lot more explanation for all of the different layers and what they represent. And that's just not part of this part of the system.
But specifically for this one, because the more people become aware of it, the more people are going to look at it, and the more explainers we can give so that they understand right away, you know, this is a nor'easter setting, not, you know, 4th of July. That's all. I'm just putting the idiot factor in there.
Yeah, Vince, I'm wondering if we can change the name of the layers where it says, you know, present probability of coastal flooding. You know, should we add, you know, due to storms?
We can try. I can ask Nate if that is. I don't know if there's a character limit or whatever, but certainly a question I can ask.
Because I think Peter has a good point that the more clear we can be about this, the better it is for the public. But there are a lot of opportunities for misinterpretation. You know, just the one that I pointed out is 100% doesn't mean you're underwater all the time. You know, but that's what somebody could take away from this.
Yeah, this is certainly a complex model. There is no doubting that. And there's a 9-page FAQ sheet that goes with this to try and explain it to people. It's not simple and straightforward. And I've presented that 9 pages and sent it to the committee a few times. I think it's even on the town website in the Coastal Resilience Library. So it's out there. It's not like something that we haven't talked about. It's so trying to get people to understand it and to have to explain it in detail to everyone that would have a question about it, that's the job of the Coastal Resilience Coordinator and my current position. So I'm free to help people out with this all the time, and I regularly do. People do come in with questions, and I get a lot of emails and calls to ask questions about this stuff. But yeah, it's not straightforward. And Peter has a brilliant point about the making sure it's understandable to all.
And just again to emphasize, there is going to be training available for how to use this information. And any of us that think that the training ought to point in a specific direction, we can go ahead and take that survey and provide feedback to the CZM office to help them design the training for people who might not be expert users.
Who's going to do that training?
It's being put on by the Coastal Zone Management Office of the state.
Mhm.
And I imagine it will be online training. But there's more information available from the link in the agenda on that. So thank you, Vince. It's good time well spent on that, I think. Returning to the updates and announcements. There is a recording available now of the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative Net Zero 2022 conference. The link is available on the agenda, and Vince was a presenter in session 4. The nice thing about that is the links are broken out into the different sessions, so you don't have to watch all the way through to get to Vince's segment if that's what you're interested in. But I did find that the entire conference was useful and valuable. The Massachusetts Climate Change Assessment has been released. And the quote there in the agenda, this assessment will directly inform the first 5-year update to the State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan that will be released in fall of 2023. So just a note that that's available. We may return to that if we find interesting bits in that, but that is a pretty recent release and we haven't had a chance to review yet. The Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative has a grant opportunity. And one of the subjects that they are looking for projects to fund is climate change and island resilience research. I know we have several members of the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative who are members of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Does anybody want to chime in with more information on this? Vince? And then Jen.
Yeah, Jen might be a better placed person to speak on this. I just wanted to make it clear to everyone that this is a wonderful grant and grant opportunity aimed at students, and they're usually in the few $1,000s range, and Jen to correct any of that as she needs to.
Jen?
Sure, thank you, Mary. NBI offers grants every year, and usually it's just biodiversity related at that smaller amount, but we kind of have a unique opportunity last year and this year to we have someone that wants to support climate change and biodiversity related research projects at a bit of a higher level. So we're trying to get that announcement out. It's for anyone that does, research. So it's students, but also professors or, independent contractors that do research on the side. So we're trying to, if you know of someone or want to push that out somewhere, just the more attention we get to it. The deadline is March 3rd for submitting those proposals. And then any work that gets done will end up being presented eventually at NBI's conference that happens every other year. So hopefully we get some good stuff out of it.
Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Next item on the agenda, the Boston Harbor's Stone Living Labs annual conference coming up at the end of April. Nature-based coastal resilience in urban settings. It's currently open for registration, but also for submission of abstracts. Although I think the deadline might be like tomorrow for the submissions. And just a little background on that. They work on the Boston Harbor Islands park system. So they have an interesting setting and one that might be extremely interesting to us because it's island-based. So if anybody is interested in that conference, it would be interesting to have a report back from it if someone's able to attend. I believe that's in person. And last announcement, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Expression of Interest submission is open. There's a link for more information on the agenda. And the Natural Resources Department is reviewing that to find opportunities for applications. Anybody with anything on those announcements that you want to add? Vince?
Yeah, just a minor one. I was reading on about the MVP grant expressions. It's just a letter of interest. It's due for the 20th. And it doesn't hold you to anything. It just is the kind of early indication for MVP to use and to be able to start to advise people if needed, because that's something that they do. The only thing I want to kind of make committee members aware of is that it looks to me from my reading of the rules this year, there might be a small change. Previously, any community could go for any number of grants that they wanted. It looks like this year, each community might be restricted to 2 grants. That kind of reflects the competitive nature and also the interest in MVP from some communities. I am trying to make NRD the hub for MVP, but it is a fact that other departments can also apply for it. So I've got to monitor this and pay attention to who might be putting what grants forward and make sure that NRD and CRAC are involved.
Thank you, Vince. Rachel? Rachel, and then we'll go to Gary.
Thank you, Mary. Vince, is this community specific, or can MVP grants come in with multiple communities together?
So this is a variable I've yet to fully understand. It seems like the rule changes are like affects the municipality, so the whole town. So MVP is open to municipalities and island-based organizations, community-based organizations and nonprofits. So technically, yes, Land Bank could totally go for a grant. And if you're going to, please let me know, because I want to control this, because I already have a list of things that I need to understand for the applications, and I'm planning on putting 2, and I'm obviously going to go for the maximum. So yeah, we should probably talk about that.
Just to follow up, and I wasn't specifically asking about the land bank, but I was wondering if multiple municipalities could come in together. So could the Vineyard and Nantucket together put in an expression of interest, or is it specifically designated for individual communities?
That has happened before, that multiple communities go together on things, or multiple organizations, just so long as it's one submission, then that's fine.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. And Vince. Gary?
2 questions, Vince. Do we know what type of funds, what amounts might be available for receipt of these grants?
They haven't said yet, and that will come out with, I'm hoping that will come out with the official announcement in the end of March, beginning of April, when they put that out. And then that enters the kind of 6-week to 2-month time frame to put your grant application in. Last year it was due by, it was at the first week of June, I think. So there's several months in this in putting it together. So the amount of money last year was high. I think it was in the 70 million range, but they had to divide that by amongst something in the order of several hundred million in potential grant applications that they received from the 78 municipalities that are entitled to apply for it. So it's competitive.
Well, that's good. And the second question I have is, when it says municipal vulnerability preparedness, that sounds to us to be very consistent with our focus on the most important thing that came out of the entire study, which is our infrastructure. And so with respect to municipal vulnerability, I think of the storage treatment plant, I think of, the ferry, stuff like that. So hopefully we will be able to get, I think our committee, not just the Natural Resources Department, or to be putting a letter in saying we're interested, because it fits right into our primary focus, which is protection of our infrastructure.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, any other comments before we move on? Jen?
Sure. Vince, you said the letter of interest was due on the 20th. What are the projects from Natural Resources that you're thinking about putting forward as it relates to the CRAC committee?
The ones that I'm most interested in at the moment is one for Madaket Beach and the Madaket area. For the in the CRP, it was the Dune project in that area. So something along those lines is one of my targets. I'm also trying to figure out if we should adapt the downtown flood relief barrier to MVP and put that in, as well as putting it in for CZM. So I might put that one forward for 2.
Great, thank you, Vince. Okay, next we have discussion with Niles Parker, Executive Director of the Nantucket Historical Association. You may remember, I think back in October, Niles was here giving us a preview of the project that the WPI students were going to be working on for the Whaling Museum. And the students were not able to attend today. It's the first day of classes for them. But we do have the links to their presentation and to their video recording in the agenda. And Niles was gracious enough to come back and give us some takeaways from that project. Niles?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me back. Nice to be with you again. And thought I'd share my screen and let you see the, find it here. Okay. Everybody see that all right?
Thank you. Go ahead, Niles.
And people can see this so far?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, I think previously, and I'm sorry the students can't be with us today. They really did an excellent job. But we had 4 students from Worcester Polytechnic Institute working with us over the last several months. And their task was to help us create a tool that we could use to begin to tell some of the stories about the risks that we face with our properties and obviously that Nantucket faces in general. It was a really productive internship, I would say, where I think they learned quite a bit, as did we, and came away with a prototype that I think has some lasting value for us in ways in which we might be considering using a similar product for all of our historic properties on the island. And kind of hearkening back to the point that was made earlier by Peter, I think it was really important for us to better work with them on understanding some of the different flooding probability maps and some of the terms and tools that have been offered. And Vince, I know they really benefited from spending quite a bit of time with you and learning about how much the town and the island have already been doing in this regard, and using some of those terms and utilizing some of those tools that you might see here. The idea was to develop a prototype that was sort of based off the GIS model that we could utilize and begin to tell stories about our properties and about the history of the island and about the future that we might explore at each of our properties. And so we began with the Whaling Museum in that campus on Broad Street, where the museum shop is, and the couple of buildings adjacent to the Whaling Museum. And they created a Esri ARC GIS story map for us that is interactive in nature and lets them upload photos, film, maps, things like that. And I'll show you some of those things here. That lets us create sort of a multi-layered approach to telling the story about this property. And then, as I say, incorporating some of the maps that are interactive that we will be able to keep evergreen and upload as more information becomes available. So this is a prototype that we can build off of going forward. So as you scroll through, it tells a bit of the history of the museum. And you can, as I say, it's interactive, so you can click on elements along the way to see photos, historic photos that they found. Let's see how long this is going to take to load here. So it's going to take quite a while to load in. But one of the things that was really helpful for us in this process was these students were able to gather these various materials which were in a number of different places at our research library, here in our offices, at the town, and so forth, and be able to put them in one place so we'll have access to those, and our resources will be much more organized from that standpoint. So you can see the different photographs that they have located along the way. And as you go through, they've broken it down into different eras of the building's history, talking about the old candle factory when it was converted into the Whaling Museum in the early 1930s, the addition of the Peter Folger Museum, and the renovation that was done in the early 2000s. I realize I'm going through this fairly quickly here, but we are going to be making this public so people can explore on their own. And as I said, our hope is that we can do this with each of our properties going forward to create an interactive tool for people to explore the history of the property and then see the threats that the property faces. Again, utilizing some of the town resources here, and goes into some detail with, as you were previously discussing, about threats from sea level rise in 2030, 2050, 2070. They also have links that you can follow to learn more. Here's going to that NOAA chart where you can explore. Well, again, these are some of the issues that you were speaking about earlier. Again, trying to tell that story and better explain it to people who might be interacting with this map.
But Naz, would this be available for people to review on a screen at the Whaling Museum or another location open to the public?
Yes, Mary, ultimately it will be. It'll be ideally a link from our website and then an interactive touchscreen in the museum as well. We wanted to sort of see this and play with it for a while, see what changes we had to make or any edits that we need to make. And then we'll do exactly that. So again, they created these links. Using many of the resources that the town has provided and is currently working on, and with links to those departments and to those documents so that people can explore those as well. And then got into some of the specific issues that we are already facing that you can see here. You can click on any of these to see those issues, such as groundwater intrusion that we're already dealing with. Some of the cracking in the mortar and the foundation walls, some of the piping and those issues that we've been dealing with lately. This transformer box, which powers a number of the buildings in this vicinity. You get the idea. And then beginning to think about prevention strategies. What can we do short term? And then some of the issues that we may have to consider longer term. And so issues like sandbagging and water prevention, intrusion prevention, such as drop-in barriers that we already utilize, to things like creating walkways within the candle factory to get people up over the water if it's coming into the building on a more regular basis, allowing us to have a pump underneath that elevated floorway, to ultimately perhaps things like elevation. Shorter term landscape adaptations and alterations are things we'll certainly be looking into and exploring. And then elevating the buildings and foundations, which, you know, is a significant challenge and issue with a lot of costs that we'll have to explore over a bit of time to see if that's something that we're gonna want to pursue or even can pursue. But and then lastly has a series of resources that people can click on, again, to follow through, to sort of see what these resources are that already exist, that the town has already developed, and that people are working on going forward. Again, we do not want to be doing this on our own or in a bubble. You are way out ahead of us. And so we want to be utilizing these resources and directing people to those resources. And at the end of the day, hopefully telling a story and helping people better understand what some of these resources are and how we can utilize them, not just here at the Whaling Museum, but our various historic properties around the island. So I think our takeaway was, I think this is a very useful tool for us that we can think about employing across our portfolio of properties at the NHA as a way to create an educational resource to help tell these stories and hopefully better explain what some of the challenges are and ways in which we might try to tackle some of these challenges going forward. So the students, the 4 students we got to work with, really did an excellent job. Very committed to the process, and we're still in touch with them. As I said, we hope to be making some updates to this story map, adding to it, and then making it available to the public.
Great,
And
thank
with that,
you.
I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that this is both very comprehensive and very easy to digest. It's very accessible. And I think they did a great job of bringing together all of these different resources, whether it's dry statistics from NOAA or history from the building or the mechanical problems that you might have to face. Those are all very different aspects of the entire problem that we're facing. And they just did a great job of bringing it all together. So I'm thrilled to see this.
I agree, Mary. I think they really did. It was a bit of a challenge, I think, for them when we first sat down and started ticking off the various things we wanted them to hit. And for the most part, I think they really did do a nice job of doing exactly that. I didn't get into it, but they even got our electrical and plumbing drawings and floor plans in there so you can see those. And as changes are made, we can update those. Again, it's really helpful for us from an operational perspective, just to have all of these things in one place that our staff can access relatively easily as well.
Questions or comments from committee members for NALS? Peter?
Yes, Vince, I'm wondering if, just seeing this now, but I'm wondering if we can do the same sort of thing for the entire island to make it something that anyone can go to. I mean, I'm thinking about public education here. Have a little dot, click on it. There's a photo of a key weak spot, and this is what we're doing. This is what's proposed, so that everybody can see all the spots where we're really concerned, just to create more public awareness. And I'm sure that would take man hours or woman hours or however long it would take, but I think it'd go a long way to showing everybody, this is real, water's coming, I don't know, something like that.
Vince?
Lovely idea. Can I pitch an idea in return, so to speak? A lot of this information exists in a different format in the existing conditions and risk assessment that was done about halfway through the CRP development. So it would be cherry picking out some of those things to show where some of the highest risks are now and in 2030, 2050, 2100 and such. So that would be useful, or sorry, 2070, not 2100. And that would be very useful. I don't want to jump onto something that's later on the agenda, but that's probably something that could be tackled by another position in the town. So let's see if we can try that. I also don't know, but maybe, just maybe, there's potential that this could be something that a student could study and get an NBI grant for. I'm kind of winging it at this point, I have to say.
Okay, other questions or comments for NALS? Gary?
Yeah, I think I wanted to say it was an excellent presentation. And as Vince was just saying, if we could get some help, and to the extent that there were 4 students who were able to really help the Whaling Museum do all of this, maybe we can use that as a model to get students as well, groups of them, involved in putting together these kind of presentations, because it really would be very helpful for the public to see what the thoughts are with respect to the short term and the medium term, especially based on what our projections are.
Vince, just wondering, does the Natural Resource Department get summer interns? I know some departments do.
We do, but we get them for the hatchery. We don't have office interns as such. It's an interesting question, though. I do have kind of a side note about WPI. I love WPI students. It's one of those things that you get the students in, they do this massive study. And when we tried to compare it to something before, because we were trying to define it at one point for looking at not grant proposals, for looking at contract review type things, because we get a lot of WPI studies here. It's almost the equivalent of getting like a free $30,000 to $50,000 study and report. That's the kind of work that they do. They do very good work. It's student work, but still very good. And the results that they give us are kind of in line with kind of a $30,000 to $50,000 response. So that is the huge benefit. If we could try and apply something very similar to the CRP, that would be terrific. I don't know how we're going to manage that. Maybe a new position in the town might be able to manage it, or find a way to accomplish it. But I love it. Let's see if we can make something like this happen.
You have to find a way to get it into the curriculum of some of these places where the students are attending, so it can become their main project for the semester.
I don't want to jump on a different project for a future meeting. I'm working with an Ivy League university on a similar idea, Gary.
Ian?
Thanks, Mary. So Niles, did you say that was going to be available on the NHA website in the future? I thought it was a really excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, it is. That is exactly our goal.
Great. Any idea of when it'll be up and running?
I would think very likely in the next 5 or 6 weeks.
Wow. Great. Thank you. I think it's undoubtedly going to be very useful as we go forward for, the wider public really getting to grips with this. Thank you.
Yes, and I would just add briefly, it is, as I mentioned, it's our hope to do this with ultimately all of our properties, though they might not be at risk of flooding in the same way. There are other climate-related impacts that we are anticipating, and just sort of, we think it's an interesting prototype that could be used to tell multi-layers of stories and maintenance issues and things like that for the properties. So to whatever extent we can work with you, work with the town, as we are developing those story maps, if that's part of a larger project, as was just hinted at, please count us in. We'd love to bring whatever resources we could or work with you to help make that happen.
Now, speaking as an NHA member for a moment, I think it would be great if you were able to present some of this at the annual meeting for the NHA, and that would certainly help the general public become more aware of these coastal resilience issues. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, great idea, Mary. Thank you. Making a note of that.
Peter?
Yeah, Niles, sooner or later, you guys are going to get going with your food for thought for the winter. Maybe this is a thing that goes on that schedule right away. And you just did a 1, 2, 3 quickie presentation for us, but I'm sure you can stretch it out for people who show up. And that's a whole different, demographic than us sitting here that knows it. So
I love it. Yeah, great idea.
Further comments or questions on this topic? All right, Niles, thank you so much for returning to tell us what happened with that interesting project. And we hope to have more communication from the NHA about how this has wonderful legs and it's getting out into the public. I think it's not only great for the NHA, but it's great for just making people aware of coastal resilience issues. And that is definitely part of our mission. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing here.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right, next item on the agenda is a presentation from Rachel Freeman, who is a employee of the Nantucket Land Bank, as well as a member of our committee, giving us an update on the Land Bank's Washington Street Resilience Project. She had originally presented on that back in August, and we have a link to that meeting if you are interested in seeing that earlier presentation. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Mary. All right, let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So my thought about today's topic was, well, there's a couple things. One thing that I'm hearing continuously come up today is that this is so complicated. The MCFRM model is incredibly complicated. All the different factors that are going into these models are amazing, and I'm not going to claim to fully understand all of them by any means whatsoever. But one of the things that Mary and I were discussing in a recent meeting was the fact that it's not completely clear how this pretty picture turns into coastal resiliency, and how did we actually get to that location. So I was going to focus today on how we actually did that, and hopefully explain some of the, or get into some of the flood extents. Let's see, I want to go to my next slide here. Get into some of the flood extents and how it's an iterative process where basically, you know, Scape, who's the landscape architecture firm we're working with, has listened to what the land bank's interested in seeing happen, and areas of restoration and public access and, you know, integration into the shoreline and all the concepts that we're interested in looking for in these park designs. And then what we do is they take a look at it from the lens of performance modeling and flood performance modeling, specifically focused on like flood extents, flood depths, and velocities. And this is where the Woods Hole Group comes in. And we've sort of developed this fantastic partnership between Scape and the Woods Hole Group. And I feel incredibly lucky to be working with both groups. And so today I was really just going to sort of try and delve into a little bit into what the flood extents were on Washington Street that really forced the design that we have now, and how we got to that point. Just to give you an idea, some of the technical memos we get from the Woods Hole Group include things like the Massachusetts coastal flood model, risk model, and then there's all these other models that they're using as well. So they're including, you know, NOAA data as well that you described, but there's also the advanced circulation model and the unstructured simulating waves near shore model, and the X-Beach coastal hydrodynamics and sediment transport model. So, you know, there's this whole level that we were just touching on this morning that, you know, it's actually a huge challenge as to how do you make this accessible to everyone? How do you get this information out there to the public so that everyone looks at that GIS layer and says, oh, I get that. These are storm events. So, you know, and the 10% storm event means that in this location, it will happen, you know, maybe 1 in every 10 years, or there's a 10% chance that this will happen at this location this year. How do we simplify it? And because when I look at things like the unstructured simulating waves nearshore model, I just sort of like, it's like a screen goes down. And I actually think this is really fascinating information. So what I wanted to do was, again, really focus on flood extents, because I feel like if I got into flood depths and velocities, I could spend, you know, 10 minutes on each of these. And it's just probably a lot and maybe a little bit too much, but know that sort of the same concepts of modeling are going behind each of these different types of flooding and, you know, ways that water is accessing our coastline. So I was going to start with this picture because I wanted to just describe how the Woods Hole Group started to look at this. So basically, they broke it down. And one of the biggest questions we keep getting, I'm jumping around a little bit, so feel free to ask me questions. But one of the biggest things we keep getting is, so if you don't have all of Washington Street, right? Like that great pretty picture that I showed you at the top is, you know, this full build out of all of Washington Street. And that's a bit of a pipe dream because there's private parcels, there's, you know, town land that they may not be interested in integrating this plan into just yet for various reasons. And so there's all these reasons that there might be gaps along the way. So one of the things that the Woods Hole Group did was they basically look at this in a framework where they say, you know, okay, so what are the existing conditions in the model? Like, you know, what is there now? And how is water going to impact this area in the existing conditions if we did nothing? And then they do the whole thing. So what if we looked at the long-term framework? which is basically the entire extent, you know, looking at all the different boardwalks and salt marshes and everything in between, and we'll just include all of it. And then they start to break it down and they start to pull out things like the private parcels. And what this allows them to do, and I've really only learned this through working with them, that I think is really fascinating, is it allows them to see through this process where the gaps are and where we're getting these flood pathways along Washington Street. Again, I'm really focused on Washington Street right now for this talk, just to try and kind of keep it small. But what are the flood pathways on Washington Street? And if you start pulling out these private parcels, you know, where are we seeing water breaking through? And so what they ended up doing through this whole process was they ended up basically looking at the long-term framework as a whole. And then they ended up looking at the long-term framework, which again is the entire, all of Washington Street built out, with Commercial Street blocked. So what they were seeing in these models, and I'll show you examples of kind of nice, great renderings of the model, and you'll see the flood pathways in a second. But what they basically saw was where we're having a huge flood pathway, even if we build this whole park system, is through Commercial Street. So we're getting a ton of water that actually ends up coming from Commercial Street all the way down along Washington Street. So it's interesting. So when you start seeing these things, then they go back and say, okay, so how should we change this plan accordingly, right? And this is where the iterative process comes in order to really get the best design. This, for me, I put this in because, again, sort of in the land of a lot of this is new information and I'm learning as I go. It's really helpful for me when I say, you know, deployable flood barrier, to have an idea in my mind of what that is, because, you know, it could be just about anything at this point. And so this is an example of something they use in Boston. One thing that I really liked about it was because I think it actually looks like it's probably around 8 feet high, which is sort of the number we keep shooting for. And, you know, that definitely comes out of sea level rise productions, which I'll show you in a second. But also you can see how people put these up and they take them down, and they put them up and they take them down. And so for areas where we do have major flood pathways and that we're seeing through this modeling program, there is potential to do temporary mechanisms during storm events that will hopefully alleviate substantial flooding and risk to infrastructure. This was these are the peak water levels they utilized for the modeling. And you can see obviously why we ended up with 8. It's a great number, and it basically covers our bases for a little while. And this was as far as they went with the modeling that I'm going to show you today. And let's see what's next. I'm just going back to this for 1 second. I guess what I'd add is, again, these are storm events, but they also incorporate spring tides down below. So we have both. We have the storm event and the sunny day flooding, basically, from 2030 and 2050. And, you know, what we were looking at in the GIS layers was basically the storm events, which, again, we've focused on the 10% and the 50% storm, because we feel like those are really approachable numbers and things that definitely could happen. So that's where we're at there. This is an example of some of the different types of output that they give us, which is a lot prettier in my mind than a lot of numbers. It really helps me see what's going on. So they have, again, existing conditions on the left and long-term framework. So the long-term framework incorporates our entire design. And this is the flood extents during a 10% storm in the present day. So we're talking about the here and now. And in the here and now, if we got a 10% storm, you can see the amount of flooding that Washington Street would incur and downtown. And they've particularly focused where the arrows are, as those are what they would refer to as flood pathways, where you're seeing water actually access into the site further than just, you know, the immediate edge. And so then when you install the long-term framework, which is that, you know, park system with decking and everything, again, knowing that the highest height, which is achieved, and, you know, when you're visually looking at something that's flat, it's different, but knowing that each section of that framework basically has a multi-use path at the back at some level that is 8 feet high. So somewhere on that site, 8 feet high has been achieved, which is why you see much greater or much reduced flooding on these sites if you actually installed all that decking. As you can see, though, they're still showing that there's flood pathways up here by Commercial Street and down here over towards Sales. This is Goose Pond down here, just to give you a point of reference. This is the Great Harbor Yacht Club. And you can see that those are two really big access points, even if we were to install that network of parks along here. This is, and this is where they start to break it down. This is the long-term framework with the private parcels removed, right? So once you start pulling out private parcels, you start seeing that there's additional water access into the site. We're getting a greater extent of flooding, and it just is for us actually a great way of, you know, motivating us to really try to implement this at a large scale. The other thing is that you can do deployable flood barriers in some of these other areas, because if somebody's house basically becomes a flood pathway, it's not going to work out very well for them either. So, you know, it's impetus to work with private homeowners to, you know, try and all get on the same page. We've always said that coastal resiliency is really a collaborative effort, and this is a huge piece of it. And this type of information allows us to say, you know, this was what it would look like if we included your property and we work together, and this is what it will look like if we don't. So that's great. And then this was really interesting. And when they started to look at these different flood pathways, like we said, Commercial Street really popped out. And interestingly enough, what you can see here, and it's not completely pointed out, is that all of this flooding here, almost all of it actually generates from this area. Which is why when you install the deployable flood barrier on Commercial Street, you just have so much less flooding in terms of extent, which the model has allowed the Woods Hole group to basically say, you know, they pull out pieces and they put back in pieces, and then they look and they say, well, what if we put something over here? You know, how would that impact it? And, you know, just iterative process of mathematics that these guys are just amazing at. So continuing along here in my journey, I actually can't see this. So this is the 50% storm in 2030. And again, this is exactly the same thing we were just looking at as the 10%, but these are the iterations that they perform. You know, where we have the existing conditions and then the long-term framework. I'm not gonna, you know, stick with this forever because it's basically the exact same thing, but in a, you know, 50% storm and not a 10% storm. Again, noting that even with the long-term framework, what you have is you have an issue up towards Commercial Street, and you have an issue down towards Goose Pond that we need to be well aware of. Similarly, sort of skipping not too fast over this, but once you get private parcels, you know, you do have a larger extent of flooding, but again, the flood pathway is basically being through Commercial Street. And if you put that deployable flood barrier in there, you're really cutting off that flood pathway. So even if we weren't able to acquire private parcels in that area, a deployable flood barrier on Commercial Street is a pretty, it seems like a great resiliency option for this area. And then this was supposed to be a little bigger, sorry. This is really just tides. So this is 2050 tides. And looking at what the flood extents are proposed for the 2050 tides with the long-term framework, and then with the long-term framework, including a Commercial Street barrier. So this is fascinating to me because you can see that with our long-term framework, we still have flooding with those tides. But all that flooding is coming from that access point at Commercial Street, which is always the question, like what happens at the ends, right? What happens where you stop? However, if you put in that deployable flood barrier, everything starts to look a lot better. So these are some of the types of pieces of the puzzle that we are bringing together in terms of, it's like the underpinnings of what's resulting in that design that you're seeing. I'm actually, what I want to do is go back to the beginning just to show everyone. So, you know, in full build out, it, like I said, it still means that we need our deployable flood barrier up here on Commercial Street, because it's still going to come down Commercial Street and, you know, wrap around and not really do us much good. But like I was saying, you know, it's really important to keep in mind here that this back path that's a dotted line, you know, is slated to be 8 feet tall at some point. And that is really what is the stopping point. It's like they refer to it as the last line of defense. You know, so you'll have dunes, you'll have salt marshes, you'll have a beach, and but then it really is not meant to get past that 8 foot high multi-use path, which will really be infrastructure at some level. So I hope that was helpful. I was trying to sort of explain how we got here, really focused on flood extents. As I said before, they also went into velocities and erosion issues. So if you put in a dune, how much erosion is going to occur over time of the dune, and how much are you going to have to, you know, nourish that, or what is that going to look like in this site? But that's sort of like my Cliff Notes version of the math that underpins all of this design and how we actually got here and why we think it's going to work. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Do we have questions or comments from committee members? Peter.
Yeah, great presentation. It really makes sense. It's easy to understand. I'm just wondering, for those houses that are to the south of where your where the last slide you showed ends, I know you guys can't comment on possible purchases that you're working on, but do you think the land bank is thinking about, I mean, just wondering about, you know, would you be able to buy those? I don't know how you can answer that. I am thinking of a friend of mine's house,
I mean,
who just, you know, this past spring got it, you know, up and ready, and he's turned it into an Airbnb, and it's right there, you know, the one that's got the beach grass or the dead beach grass in the front of it. It's a little cottage, and, you know, I know he's trying to pull some income out of there. Maybe he'd be amenable to, you know, selling that, and because it looks like this works better if there aren't any houses, any structures all the way from Commercial Street to where the condos are on Washington Street Extension.
Right. I mean, of course it works better, but I guess what I would say is it's not, what's interesting is when you start pulling out those private homes, you're not seeing like the same level of flooding that you are from that commercial street flood pathway, right? So it's places like that that we start to say, okay, that's a issue. Whereas private homeowners and the homeowner you're describing, we actually have, you know, we've talked to him about things and we are happy to work with him, and whatever we figure out, you know, we're eager to share that knowledge and to figure out a way to make it work for everyone. And like I said, if maybe it is a deployable flood barrier, I've recently become really open-minded about them. And I know that what I will say is in terms of areas that we're focused on, we're really focused on the areas that have the biggest impact. So the flood pathways that have the biggest impact. And if that's a property we own or don't own, it's still an area we're focused on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Jen.
Thanks, Mary. Rachel, thanks for this presentation. It was really awesome to see it laid out this way with all the back steps and just make it really obvious how that analysis has happened. You know, I've walked Washington Street and thought about resilience out there a lot. And what I've thought should happen is what you have up here, but you have all the back data, which I think is so important for people thinking about how you process through this. And I think, I mean, I'm kind of a fan of the flood barriers too, but I like it in use with the nature-based solutions as you presented. It's like, you know, okay, we need that hard wall somewhere, but we don't just need a hard wall. We need, like, this is a really great example to show how you can combine the two together, which, you know, I think is really great. And I love where you have the expanded salt marsh, because that's where I've always thought it should go. It just makes perfect sense. But this is such a great example of how we could go and think about other neighborhoods around the harbor and how you work through that process of, there are solutions out there. We just have to get the data and the experts that could pull that together to help us kind of proof through and, okay, here's the solution. Now, what happens when we add the water with this solution? Okay, now this is the next spot we have to look at. Like, to me, it seems like this is a process we need to go through, you know, for places like Brant Point or other places in the downtown or out in Mattakit, and for the land bank to kind of spearhead doing this, I think is really awesome. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Jen. I will agree that every time I see this, I do think about other locations that would really benefit from that type of information, where if we did this, what would happen here? You know, and how does that water move around, and where else is it going? And I just kind of focused in on this area, but they do look at the ends, you know, because it's sort of like, you know, a retaining wall where you have scour at the ends. Nobody wants that. So what happens at the end? You know, what happens down beyond the end? These are important questions to ask.
Before we go to Vince, I'm going to jump in. When the land bank showed me some of these plans, and I asked them to come and show the whole committee, one of the questions that immediately jumped in my mind was, you know, looking at the example of the effectiveness of a deployable flood barrier on Commercial Street, what are the other little pieces that we can find that will have a big impact before we get to the huge projects of, you know, building neighborhood level defenses? You know, are there small things that we can do that aren't going to require millions and millions of dollars and years of planning that will have an impact that will benefit the people who are currently here? And so, you know, starting to think about what are some of those little things that we can do, whether it's on Easy Street, whether it's on Washington Street, you know, wherever it may be. That's a conversation I've started having with Vince. And I think that's an area that perhaps we overlooked a little bit in the Coastal Resilience Plan, which is more of the big picture. But I think it's definitely worth asking, what are some of the little things that we can do? Little fixes, little interventions that have an impact right away. Vince and then Matt.
Matt's a committee member. If he wants to go first, that's up to Matt. I'm happy to wait.
You can go, Vince.
Thank you. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm just going to shift stuff around on the screen so I can see people better. This is terrific. And it was one of those things that I've always wanted to see more of. I absolutely love deployable flood barriers, but I have to, and the information here is terrific, and that little kind of gap that this would go into is terrific, but I have to do my job and point out some of the associated risks that go with deployable flood barriers so that everyone has the complete information. They're terrific, they do work, but there's a handful of issues with them, and I learned this in the development of the CRP, and there was mention of deployable flood barriers in the CRP, but they weren't a recommendation, and I was, yeah, anyway, move on. So we have to think about a few things when it comes to deployable flood barriers. The installation of them, that they have to be done on time before floodwaters get around them. When they're not in use, you have to store them, and even though they're devices that look really robust, they still take maintenance to look after them and paint them and recoat them or whatever needs to be done to stop them rusting, because they are in salt water. So when we were looking at this in the development of the CRP, storage turned out to be a problem on Nantucket. Having a DPW site or a site in the downtown area, a small place to just put deployable flood barriers so they can be put out, that's hard to find that. Getting them out on time is another problem. And you have to have the maintenance crews and the right people available with the right equipment. And there's another problem. If you don't put them out on time, or you just get hit by an unexpected event all of a sudden, I'm thinking like the perfect storm that just generated very close to here, then you can get sued for not having them out in time. If a person's property or if streets get flooded or whatever, you can open up that risk to yourself. So there's the kind of maintenance and installation type risks, you know, that has to be borne in mind. There's another separate risk to this as well. Is the property that you're restricting access to, whether it be public or private or used for recreational purposes or whatever it happens to be. Somebody might want to just go stand there and look at their boat to make sure their boat's there. And if you put like a 6 to 8 foot high wall in that area, you're restricting public access. You're doing it for a short time and for really good reasons, and I have no problem with that. But people do get ideas and don't like the restriction of access. This is one of the reasons why in the CRP, we took the kind of longer term view and went for larger infrastructure. All that said, still love this plan. I want to see it. I want to see this in place. I want to see deployable flood barriers, but I just have to make people aware that there are associated risks.
Thank you, Vince. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, but before I do that, first off, there has been talk over the years about development on the National Grid lot and NIR lot. A lot of that was going to, I think it was going to be raised about 6 feet. So potentially Candle Street will be raised at the same time that's raised, if that ever happens. And maybe it could be more integrated. I love this plan. I think it's great. So now I'll go to the flood barriers. At some point, you do have, if we have this much water, you do have to draw a line, and you do have to put, temporary or permanent barriers up of some type. Looking at those temporary, in the bakery, I have 2 mixers in case a mixer breaks. I have 2 ovens in case an oven breaks. I have backup. We should not be relying on one flood barrier. We should be putting redundancy into the system, because, if it's 6 or 8 feet of water and we're counting on one thing, we're in trouble. So if the goal is to keep water out, then we've got to find a way to keep it out and or pump it fast enough when it gets in there that we don't have a mess. But I think this is amazing that we're looking at it on a neighborhood level like this, and I thank the land bank for it. This is what I would hope this is how we need to do it everywhere on the island, and be able to work, sort of from that viewpoint is really important. So thank you.
And to Matt's point, I mean, these are storm events that we're talking about. Things go wrong in storms. The power gets cut out, things break, loose debris is blown around and can damage things. So Matt has a really good point about the redundancy of systems. Thank you, Matt, for that. And going to Joe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, I kind of want to agree with Vince and Matt. I was thinking the same thing. And, if anyone wants to see one low point, being the weakest link, you just go down to Easy Street. You go to 46, I think it is, or 48 Easy Street. It's got the lowest part of the bulkheads. And so when a we got a storm surge, that's where it comes in. So you just see that one leaky doorway or whatever you want to call it, pathway, that causes a lot of problems. It gets around the backside of everything. So, it's really important to make sure everything's in place. But like Matt says, redundancy, it's also where you're going to store all the equipment, how quickly you can get, staff utilized to get it in place. And I don't know if it's something where it's embedded into the ground and then it just pops up in front. I don't, there's got to be some solution, but it's got to be there and almost permanent in some ways. So, I know we're a long ways away, but we're not in some ways.
And before we go to Ian, one thing I wanted to add is, we talk about sea level rise and we talk about storm surge. And the fact is, any amount of water we're going to see from sea level rise, we're going to hit that level from a storm surge before we see the sea level rise. So these interventions are important for storms as well as for sea level rise. And hopefully they're designed with both the time frame and the height requirements in mind to be applicable, in either case. But with or without sea level rise, we do have storms, and they are causing problems, and it's more frequent than it was 40 years ago. Ian, or unless you just took your hand down.
Well, I just took it down. Honey, I'm busy. Excuse me. So regarding the barriers and legal implications, I mean, you go around the country from Maysville, Kentucky on the Ohio River, there's a mile-long flood barrier there. And on the Tug River in Williamson, West Virginia, the feds built basically what looks like a medieval wall, completely cutting off the town from the Tug River because of flooding. And so I would have thought for the common good, this wouldn't be an issue going forward to ensure that downtown doesn't get flooded. So I think it's a very interesting concept. And I would have thought the sooner we have sort of permanent flood barriers that can be raised and lowered, the better, as for a long-term strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other comments or questions for Rachel on her presentation? All right, excuse me just a moment. I need to sneeze.
Bless you.
All right, thank you. Rachel, thank you for the presentation. I echo Jen's words. It's really great to see the detailed work that goes into this, and it helps understand the end result. So we'll look forward to future iterations and new locations, and hopefully work by other groups as well in this respect.
Thank you, Mary.
All right, next item on our agenda, we have our Coastal Resources Technician, Morgan Sale, to give us a brief storm report with Vince, and also to demonstrate a new page on the town's website, which documents the Shoreline Change Monitoring Program, which is a recommendation of the Coastal Resilience Plan. Morgan, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. Let me just try and share my screen. I haven't done this in a while. Okay, that look good?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So as you said, I will be presenting the coastal monitoring project that we've been working on. We started this a little bit over a year ago, I believe in November of last year. Last year, not last year, was the first stations that we put up. And this is now available to view on the town website. It's not the most intuitive thing, so you kind of have to dig for it a little bit, but it's within the Community Resilience Planning subsection, as you can see here, and it's within the Coastal Resilience Plan. So as Mary said, this was outlined in the CRP as part of the Shoreline Change Monitoring Project. It's a pretty simple project. As you can see on the map, we basically established stations at a bunch of different locations around the island where we can monitor how far the coastal bank or dune may be moving due to erosion or possibly accretion, but we don't really see a lot of that. Mostly we just see erosion. So right here, figure 1 is a map of where we have stations currently. They haven't all been there for the same amount of time. Some have been there longer than others. The longest ones we have is a little bit over a year, and I think the most recent ones have only been there for about 2 months. So we've been measuring on a roughly once monthly basis. So we don't have as much data from some sites as we do for others, but we have started mostly along the South Shore because that's where we've been seeing anecdotally kind of the biggest impacts for erosion. We have at least one site on the North Shore. We've got one kind of on the east end, but most of our sites are concentrated towards the South Shore. Up here is kind of just a little explanation of how erosion cycles work, which most of you are probably familiar with. But essentially, in summer, beaches tend to accrete, and in the winter, wind and waves kind of will erode either a coastal bank or a dune and a beach. The thing about the coastal bank, though, is that it doesn't really come back, which is why these are kind of important information. And a lot of the erosion rates that we have historically aren't necessarily a very accurate reflection of what we're seeing currently, which is why we kind of wanted to get on this and have accurate sort of real-time data of what's happening and what's been going on. Here's a diagram of what a typical station looks like. It's essentially 2 or more, sometimes 1 stakes that are set back at intervals from the coastal dune or the bank. Typically we use 20 feet and we'll add more points for redundancy. A couple sites we've had our first point actually go over and be missing. So in some spots we have as many as 4 points back from the dune because they tend to disappear. So we will measure, if you scroll down a little bit, this is kind of just an overview if you guys want to check it out, an overview of kind of our timelines for establishing. Our oldest ones are at the Tom Nevers Field and parking lot and Nonantum Ave. And then we have the sewer beds. We've got 2 stations at Mattakit. We've got 3 stations at the airport. We have Dionis and Codfish Park. And then we most recently had a station put up at Hummock Pond, the end of Hummock Pond Road. Most places haven't really experienced a ton of change. Some places have experienced a lot of change. If you scroll down, important documents, there's a table right here that shows all of the data that we've collected on each site. It's not super organized. Hopefully in the future, we can kind of have things flow a little bit better and have them be a little bit easier to view. But basically here, the sewer beds is the spot that we've had the most change. So we've got 3 different spots at 3 different locations in the general vicinity of the sewer beds. Each time that we've measured is a date right here. So you can see, for example, in the beginning, we had 20, 40, 60, and 80-foot intervals. The next measurement, no change. Then we had a storm measurement. There's a little star right here to show you the storm measurement in January, where we lost 10 feet in one episode. So each date, you can kind of see how much we've lost. 12/27, this is a measurement after the recent storm on the 23rd and the 24th. So we lost 4 feet at one site in the sewer beds. We lost 18 feet at another site, and we lost another 8 feet at the other site. So all within the general vicinity of the sewer beds, there were collective losses between all 3 of those spots. And we have data tables for Mattakit. Same situation. Mattakit's really interesting because the stations are not that far from each other. One site has pretty much no changes, only a loss of about 2 feet, and the other site has a loss of 46 feet since we implemented the station. So it's interesting to me. They're not that far from each other, but I guess, I don't know. Here we have tables for Nonantum, the airport. Each of these labels you see will have like 1, a 2, or a 3. Those stand for each different kind of spot within the whole general vicinity. Airport has not really lost anything, fortunately. We have a table for Dionis. You can see some of these more recent ones we don't have a ton of data for. That's something we're going to keep collecting over time. Codfish Park, again, no change, fortunately. Here we have for Tom Nevers, which also hasn't experienced any changes. And then we have the one at the end of Hummock Pond Road, which also, as it's more recent, hasn't really lost anything. So like I said, we tend to kind of do once monthly. We try to measure after storms. We try to get pre and post storms. You can see we got one on the 20th before the storm and then another one on the 27th after the storm. But it kind of depends. And if it's not really safe to go out there, we're not going to try and get a measurement. So it's kind of on an as possible basis. yeah, that's essentially what we're doing here, and we're hoping to kind of expand. There's an implementation paragraph right here that talks about how we can use these for other projects in the future. But yeah, that's kind of it.
Thank you, Morgan. And just to emphasize that these measurements are to the edge of the coastal bank. This is not trying to display the back and forth of the width of the beach. So this is further back. And when something's lost here, as Morgan said, it's most likely a permanent loss. That sand has been contributed to the dynamic system. It's no longer stable and part of the bank. Matt, question or comment?
Just, I guess the question, Morgan, I know like SBPF has been measuring, in their area for years. Well, is there any point, and I'm not sure if anyone else is doing that anywhere on island. Will those measurements be added eventually to these documents?
That is possible, but not something I really know right now. We definitely keep an eye on the bluff, but I think with everything going on right now, it's not something that we're able to kind of fully put out there.
I can clarify that just a little if it helps. The town has been undertaking measurements in this area since 2018 on Baxter Road. Some of the measurements are on private property, and we're trying to get agreement from all private property owners before we can make it public. That has not yet been forthcoming. We're still working on it, and as it becomes available, we'll put it online. I have no idea about timeline for that.
Yeah, and Vince, I think you've said that all of our measuring stations that we have as part of this program are either on public property or with the permission of the landowner. We don't just go to private property and start putting up stakes.
Correct. And these all reflect where there's a public interest. So the sewer beds, the airport, the intersection of Madikit Road, the Chicago Street Beach, where there's been a lot of erosion, and you saw, what was it, minus 46 feet. The other ones are like at the corner of Nonantum Road, where it's getting skinny there. These are all reflective of some public interest. We're looking at expanding this a little bit into other sites where there's other types of public interest, such as barrier beach systems.
Great. Thank you, Vince. I will go to Joe and then Matt and then Ian.
Thank you. So SBPF had LiDAR and had drones videotaping, and I'm wondering if that's something that, Morgan or Vince could look into. Is that an option? Is someone could be trained to pilot those around? Seems like a quicker, easier way to get the information. But the one thing that, and Ian will back me up on this, is that SBPF kept using different types of formatting for that. So it couldn't be a seamless, historical, accurate, timeline. So whatever we do, we should probably be investing in something that's consistent and we can work with, year after year after year. But yeah, Morgan and Vince can get the pilot's license. That would be awesome. I think it'd be helpful for the town and save a little bit of footwork, but it would be something that you could run around the island fairly quickly and get a lot of these sites. So I believe it was within that quarter of an inch, something, Vince or something, Ian. Yeah. They're very accurate. So thank you.
Yeah, there was, if I may, Mary. Vince,
well, let's go to Vince to respond, and then we'll come back to Ian on that topic. Thank you.
So there's kind of a three-part answer to this. So the information that SBPF collected was collected through their consultant, and we'd have to get permission to use that. The information we're presenting here on screen today is information we've collected as part of the Natural Resources Department. This is data we're collecting ourselves. So that's one part. It's kind of hard to use, for want of a better description, third-party information. And we can update this ourselves regularly, whereas I'd have to go to SBPF's consultant on a regular basis to get them to give me the updated information. So there's one part of the problem. So to get around that, what we're looking at is kind of a two-part solution. So essentially the way this project works at the moment is we're going to the beach, we're going to the edge of the coastal bank to set locations where we're pulling string. To improve the accuracy of that, we have a kind of a two-part plan of sorts. The first part is to get a proper survey level GPS device that we can go and literally put down on the ground, and that can give to the 1/10 of a millimeter, provided you use it correctly, but millimeter is good enough for our purposes in this. And the third part of the answer, I'm going to turn over to Morgan for some recent drone work that she has been investigating.
Morgan?
I am 60% of the way through my drone training program, so it's coming.
Love it.
That's great. Thank you, Morgan. Ian, anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, and I won't make a wisecrack about whether you're learning how to drop grenades on Russians in Ukraine. So I'll stick strictly to the CONCOM, where my understanding is that the information is, building on what Joe said, the information's in the public domain, because it was from at least 2013 and goes back to 2007 when they made their first application. SBPF made its first application. And part of the orders of conditions from 2013 on was providing all this information. And as Joe mentioned, Seth Engelborg was trying to get them to use the same parameters for measurements. And I'm not sure if he was ever successful, but it should be out there. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Ian. And then let's go to Matt.
Yeah, that was my comment. Once the information it becomes public. Once it goes to the CONCOM, once it's out there, that we don't have to ask permission to go on their properties or do anything. It's public information. Now, clearly maybe it needs to be vetted. We have to understand where it was taken, et cetera. But if the goal of this eventually on the town website is to have, documentations of as many areas as possible, showing the historic accretion, historic changes, then I think that we should be delving into it and putting those up. I don't think we should be sort of saying we can't do it and it's not possible and it's not legal and finding reasons not to do it. If they've done it, if Fish and Wildlife or anyone else has done it, out on Code 2, if people have been doing it, if we can access it over time, we should, and we should put it on there. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Vince, did you want to add anything else about the storm impact right before Christmas?
Morgan covered it when she had it on screen and she was showing the areas, the sewer beds that had the most impact. Can you show that again briefly?
Yeah, and one thing I'd also like to add about that storm, one area that we do not have any stations that I would like to include hopefully soon is Sheep Pond Road. It's sort of like an in-between area between our stations that we don't really have right now, and I think that would be good. But the most recent storm, the biggest effects were at the sewer beds. So these, I don't know if I can zoom out, but these 3 tables are where we have the biggest impact at the sewer beds.
Great, thank you. Okay, any further questions? Gary, yes, go ahead.
So Vince, you can use that chart on the storage thing for the municipal vulnerability grant to show that we really need the funds.
If I may, that is absolutely the plan, to use this for grant applications. That's why we picked 10 facilities and structures and vulnerable points. That's why we started there.
Great.
Thank you, Gary. Any further comments on the update from Morgan on the shoreline change monitoring program and the implementation? Great. Well, that will continue to be updated regularly, so check back anytime you want to. And there is a link in the agenda to that page, which will also help people to get there. But Morgan did show us it's part of the Coastal Resilience Plan project page. Okay, Vince, an update on recruiting for the open Coastal Resilience Coordinator position now that you are the Sustainability Program Manager.
Thank you very much, Mary. So that position was advertised in the town website. I went through the competitive process of application and interviews and was ultimately successful in becoming the new Sustainability Programs Manager for the town. I've been in the role for about 2 months, and I've been doing it while also backfilling the Coastal Resilience Coordinator position. I've been doing both roles as best I can. And with recent activity for SBPF and other projects I'm obviously still involved in, I have not been able to dedicate the time I want to put into the new position, such as life. So we advertised and interviewed a number of candidates before Christmas. The process is not yet complete. I honestly thought when we advertised, put up the posting for this agenda, I would be able to have news today. As it happens, I don't. I can only apologize on that front, that this is still a work in progress. I would like to reassure the committee of a few things, though. I have been asked if I can backfill the position as long as it's needed, whether it's a few more days or months is irrelevant. I will. I am still going to be your main point of contact until the next person is hired and adequately trained to take over. So until I say anything otherwise, just contact me. But I would like to kind of use the committee, if I might. Sustainability is massive. It is the next big thing. And to try and understand everything we have and try and drive a lot of the factors forward that I'm going to be looking at, I wonder if I could also approach the committee at various points to bring things to this committee in particular, not just as they relate to coastal resilience. And I know this has been the main focus. And there has also been occasional chatter and discussions about, well, maybe we should expand the mission of the committee. I would probably again consider advocating for that point, and the committee can do as it pleases from there. But how about we try it and see what happens and try and use this as kind of a more environmental based committee. The sustainability issues are enormous, and not just related to the coastal environment or the environment in general, even though that is the main focus of this committee. It expands into other areas of interest, such as energy sustainability, and making sure we can have that. Greenhouse gas emissions. One of the things that I intend on driving forward pretty soon is the climate action plan. Martha's Vineyard just released a couple of months ago a terrific version of it. I've been looking at the same thing from other municipalities and other towns around Massachusetts. Some of them are brilliant. Why don't we follow some of those examples? There's going to be a number of other initiatives come up as we move forward, but I very, very much looked to this committee, as I have done in the past, and will try to in my new position moving forward. But in the meantime, I'm still fulfilling all of the roles of the Coastal Resilience Coordinator. So best of luck to everyone.
Thank you, Vince.
If that's not too self-serving.
Any questions for Vince? Well, congratulations on the new role, even though it was 2 months ago. I'm very excited for you. I hope others are as well. Matt?
I am. Vince does a great job, and I am excited. I am worried about taking the focus away from coastal resiliency. It's such a large topic. It's so overwhelming, and it's going to be hard. There's things that are in the coastal resiliency plan, like talking about zoning and how do we get neighborhoods to, talk to each other and work together, and how, there's so much and how do we make sure it's in front and center in all our town departments. There's so much that has to still be done. And I get concerned that if we layer on more big picture stuff, that we won't get to the details of this committee. So, and I think the sustainability is really important. I'm not saying it isn't, but I think that, if you have too many things, too many bosses or too many things to do, then you don't have any, and nothing will get done. So how do we, so I just warn us not to, lose our focus.
Thank you, Matt. Other comments? Right, seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes beginning with October 11th.
Okay. Bear with me one moment. There's a gentleman trying to come into our office. 1 second. Morgan's going to go deal with this. So we're going to start with October 11th. I'm just going to share that on screen. Got to move a few things around on screen. Can everybody see this okay? Move that too.
Yes.
Excellent. Take notes. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I don't think I had many amendments in this one. I do need to, oh yes, I do need to put in some information here.
And then, Vince, as I noted previously, let's see. If there are presentations or documents that we are adopting at a meeting, we want to make sure that those are included in the minutes. I think just your presentation is the only one for October 11th.
Yes, I will have that included before this gets posted.
And you have your resilience cycle, but I think that was included in the packet. So in my opinion, if something is already presented in the packet and it's presented unchanged, then we don't need to add it to the minutes because it's already available to the public on the town's website.
Yes, I'll put this in.
Okay. All right, any other comments on the minutes from October 11th?
Move approval.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't present.
Thank you, Joe. And Mary Longacre, aye. When you're ready, Vince, the minutes of October 25th.
Everybody see this okay? Yep. So I had a few things to add to this one. I added the recording link. And I had a question about this one.
Yes, so I think that the XXX was intended to be replaced by NP and EDC. Thank you, Vince. And then was there a, we included the link to the NHA's presentation or to their report. So that I think that's fine. So any other comments on the October 25th minutes? If none, we'll take a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Thank you, Gary. Wait a second. Thank you, Matt, for seconding. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. And then the minutes from November.
Okay, I had a good few edits in this one. So I added the recording link, obviously. The letter that was approved and sent, I've included that, the signed version, and I included this note to say that it's below and that it was sent on December 6th after this meeting.
Okay.
I included the link to the recording, and here is the letter that was sent to Mass DEP. Here's the signature page signed by Jason Bridges on behalf of the Select Board and by Peter Brace on behalf of CRAC. And I hate to draw attention to it, but that is some of the prettiest handwriting, Peter. That is lovely.
Yeah, Vince, and I wish I could say that that was my handwriting. You wouldn't be able to read it if I wrote it, so that was the computer.
Yeah, and by the way, there's 2 more pages that I can include if necessary. I have it here. So this is the official one that I got, and it includes the signature right pages as Peter filled out with all the correct date stamping. But for the minutes, I didn't feel that was necessary. I can include it if the committee wishes.
I agree. I don't think it's necessary. It happened after the fact and was not discussed during the meeting in that respect. So I think we're fine. So thank you, Vince, for all of that. Any other comments or questions on the meeting minutes from November 8th? If none, we'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Ian.
Second.
Thank you, Joe, for seconding. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Abstain. I wasn't present.
Thank you, Gary. Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
I was also not present.
Thank you. Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. All right, that dispenses with the minutes. Glad to have those caught up. So with the committee's permission, can we move the review of the draft fourth quarter report to the next meeting? That is not particularly time sensitive, and we are at less than 15 minutes in our scheduled time frame. We do have a couple of other items. So any objection to skipping that item for the fourth quarter report? Not seeing any objections, thank you. Public comment, question, response. So the questions were asked by Deanne Atherton on November 8th, which was our last meeting. What is the status of the sandbank, and was all the sand from Pulpos Harbor used? And Vince has a response for that.
Sure. So there was a sandbank location of sorts out by the VFW, by Commercial Way. I cannot remember the name. Shadbush Road came to me at the last second. So there was a location there. That's where that was supposed to be a sandbank, an island sandbank of sorts. That is where the sand from Pulpos Harbor went, and I can tie up both answers into one from here on. The sand from Pulpos Harbor was dredged, taken to that location, and then to answer Deanne's question, it was sold. It was sold to SBPF. SBPF ended up using that material for nourishment. I think it was 2019 or 2020, not 100% sure. But that's where the material ended up going. And there was much discussion at the select board meetings around that time on the valuation and the appropriateness of it going to SBPF and various questions like that, but that's where it ultimately went. So now then there's the status of the sandbank at the moment. This is where we get back into the next phase, and I'm excited about this. So when I wrote the scope for the sediment transport study and dredge plan for the island, I built this in. So I wanted the consultants to help find a location or a set of locations that can be used for for a sandbank once we start dredging the various Nantucket Harbor, Madaket Harbor, and Pulpos Harbor. So here's the question: we might end up with such a volume of material that might have to sit and before it gets dewatered and become inert before it gets used. How big a site will we need? We need to understand that and the potential volumes that might come from the harbour, from the sediment transport study and dredge plan before we eventually decide on the area and size of locations. So that will feed into it. It's also probably a prudent idea to imagine that it won't be one location, that it'll be several, and probably dispensed throughout the island near areas of need would be my hope. So maybe one mid-island, one Madaket area, I don't know, one in the Sconset area, who knows? But that would be one of my preferred ways of dealing with it, to have less trucking miles for when we need to get it onto beaches. We also need to understand, quite frankly, from the sediment transport study and the dredge plan, once that gets going, where the nourishment might go, as well as the dredging. So the dredge materials will come out, they'll sit for a while, we'll have to clear up those sites, so we'll have to nourish beaches. So we need to look at this in kind of a cyclical way of moving sand. Get it out, put it on a site, potentially grade it, potentially let it dewater for a year, obviously do the correct testing to make sure that it goes to the right nourishment site, so that we can then safely and per state regulation, state guidelines, pardon me, nourish beaches, so, and then clear the site so we can bring more dredge material there over time. So that's the way we need to start thinking about it in kind of a larger scale to fulfill the needs of the dredge plan and the CRP.
Thank you, Vince. So the next item is the public comment in general. Are there members of the public that have a question or comment that they want to offer at this time? Go ahead and just unmute. I see RJ Turcott.
Thank you, Chair Longacre. On behalf of the Nantucket Land Council, I'm RJ Turcott. I'm just going to be a squeaky wheel today and request that on the next agenda for CREC, there's a discussion of the island-wide sediment transport study and how it's being approached. I know I sent you a letter last month from when the Land Council reached out to our consultants, and we just want the committee to have a discussion on how this might be approached differently going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Noted. And as you saw, we had a very full agenda today, so we will try and get that on next time. Other comments or questions from the public? Doug Rose?
Thank you, Chair. I had a question. I think I'd sent it along in an email in last fall, and it was just a question about the scope of CRAC's purview and whether it could include topics that relate more to disaster recovery. I know you guys are wrestling with how broad your scope already is, and I respect that totally. But it did strike me that the whole thought of having a hurricane, a category 3 or 4 hurricane hit the island, the prospect of the island effectively being without power for, days, weeks, I'm looking at what's going on with Florida disaster recovery. I'm just wondering, do you guys view that as part of your charter, or is that something that would more rightly live in DPW's realm? Just a question, I guess, for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. That's something we can do a little research on. I'm trying to keep in mind that public comment is not a dialogue. So Vince, I'm going to ask you to hold a response, and we'll talk about perhaps a more comprehensive response. Just to note that resiliency does include recovery. It's just a quick comment. Other members of the public present that want to offer a comment or question? All right, seeing none. New business reports from the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Harbor and Shellfish. Let me just go through the list here. Select Board, Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, and other committee members. Vince?
Matt had his hand up briefly. That's why I was waving.
Oh, okay. Matt, did you have something here?
Yeah, everyone has read the news, and SBPF has turned in the keys. I'm using their term. I don't like that term, but so what I would like this committee to do is to discuss what is the credible, proper, right next steps for the town, and make a recommendation, because the town has I think we've got a lot of brain power here and a lot of knowledge, and so I'd like that to be a topic going forward, because I think we've got to find a way to work cooperatively, and the town has interests and we have interests as this committee. And so what is the right path for the town? Anyway, I'd like that to be a future topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And actually, Vince and I had a similar thought, but we wanted to make sure that the select board had the chance to discuss it first, which I believe is on the agenda for tomorrow night.
It is, and I'm not sure where we're going to come out on it at all, but I think it's, if it's not on the agenda, we're not allowed to even talk about it in this committee. So I'm asking for it to be on so we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Gary?
I agree with what Matt was saying. I was going to bring it up as well. I think it ought to be something that, part of our overall plan related to all of the parts of the island, including that. And now that the situation has changed, I think we ought to provide our committee's input as to what would be the next best thing we think to happen. So we want to put on the agenda. Thank you, Gary. Peter?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, I also agree with what Matt is saying. We definitely need to be proactive in this situation, but I've been watching, covering, writing about SBPF since they founded themselves in November of 1993. How sure are we that they are actually throwing in the keys? I'm not convinced. I'm not. Maybe on the geotubes, but then what else? They're not. I don't want to disparage them, but anyway, I think you can get by my voice what I'm saying, but I saw that and I couldn't believe it. So, and for what that's worth.
Thank you, Peter. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Other comments or questions or reports from committee members? Right, we do have noted on the agenda, Vince is invited to give a virtual presentation to the Nantucket Town Association on Tuesday, January 24th at 4 p.m. on coastal resilience in the downtown area. That meeting is open to the public. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the Town Association. And there's a link available on the agenda should anyone want to attend or if anyone wants to publicize that. And also, Vince, if you want to tell us about the next item.
Sure. So at various intervals, I get contacted by people from other municipalities asking questions about the CRP or asking how did you do this or that, various elements related to it. This is a bit of a first in that series of questions that I've been asked. Provincetown is looking at emulating Nantucket and doing something like their own CRP and using us as their model. So I've been contacted by a gentleman called Tim. He's the environmental planner for Provincetown, and we had a couple of emails, spoke briefly on the phone one day for just about 2 minutes and tried to arrange a meeting that we're still trying to get together. But I just thought it would be worth this committee seeing and knowing that that we're a role model for other communities. As we have modeled some of parts of our CRP on other communities, we're now a leader.
And that was something that has been expressed before, was the desire for us to be a leader in this space. So it's very nice to see other people looking to what we've done as inspiration. So thank you, Vince. I have one more note here. The select board did meet in November to review their strategic plan. There's a recording of that meeting available on the town's website. I don't have the link here, but I wanted to say thank you to Jason Bridges and to Matt Fee for bringing the topic that we had requested, which is including the implementation of the goals of the Coastal Resilience Plan in the strategic plan from the select board under the environmental section. That feeds into our fourth quarter report, whether or not we want to continue to make that request. So I would advise committee members to watch that section of the recording, and I'll ask Vince to send a link out to that exact section. It is a 3-hour meeting, although of course it's very interesting to watch the entire 3 hours too. But that's something to keep in mind when we come back to review the fourth quarter report, is what we want to continue to ask for from the select board, particularly with that previous item. Long story short, the decision was that coastal resilience was already reflected as a priority in the statement, and that no changes to the select board strategic plan would be made to add any other information about coastal resiliency. Not quarreling with that, just need to know what the committee feels about going forward. So that's background for the next meeting. And then additionally, at the next meeting, we had previously said that we wanted to talk about 2023 Coastal Resilience Plan priorities. Again, we are starting to pile up a large number of topics for the next meeting, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to make it on the agenda at this point. But that's definitely something to think about and be ready to discuss. And before we get to Gary, one other thing that in terms of topics for next meetings, we had talked about reviewing the Coastal Resilience Plan area by area, and that has not gotten onto the agenda. One of my thoughts is that that would be an excellent thing to do with the person who is the new Coastal Resilience Coordinator. Be a great way for them to get their feet wet. So I'm holding off on that topic, just FYI. Gary.
Yes, I had one thought. I don't know, it relates to the 2023 priorities, but with Vince taking on additional responsibilities or new responsibilities, and with us having someone new come into the slot, I'm concerned that we might be missing opportunities. And I was wondering whether or not in the current budget that is going to the annual town meeting, there is some funding being requested for a person, a grant writer. We really need a grant writer. We have so many things on our long-term agenda that needs study and funding. And I see FEMA giving out money all the time. And we talked a lot about getting someone to help us make these grant applications, but I don't know if it's in the new plan, the new budget. And I wonder if we could try to see that at least some provision was made so we could get someone focusing on that.
All right, so in terms of topics for future agendas, we can add a review of the proposed budget and probably also the town meeting articles that might apply to coastal resilience. Thank you, Gary. Any further comments, updates from committee members? And I note that Jen had to drop off at noon. All right, if there are none, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Gary, you're muted, but that looked like you said so moved.
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Roll call vote, Gary Beller.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Take
Ian,
care.
I'll go get that thingy now.
Thank you.